Scoob is directed by Tony Servan or Kervon. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. And stars quite actually a pretty big cast, featuring the voice talents of Will Forte, Mark Wahlberg, Zac Efron, Frank Welker, Amanda Seyfried, and among others. And this is now the reboot of the classic Scooby-Doo franchise that deals with basically the kind of a sort of origin story of Scoob, but also kind of doing its own thing that's a little different than the traditional Scooby-Doo franchise is known for. And in this story, it deals with the Scooby Gang, Shaggy, Scooby, Fred, Velma, and Daphne, who essentially get into this plot that involves where it has to do with this villain or they encounter basically a they encounter like these weird type of robots kind of things that are called the Rottens, and they're basically Scooby and Shaggy and Scooby get rescued by the Falcon Fury, and they meet Shaggy's idol that he's been fond of, the Blue Falcon, and Dynamite the Dog Wonder, and there's a plot basically for them to go after the known villain from, if you remember from the cartoon series called the Wacky Races, the villain called Dick Dastardly, and he wants to basically capture Scooby for his own purposes and involve collecting like these weird giant skulls of Cerebrus, and it becomes basically a superhero type of plot for Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
And now here's some backstory. Now, growing up, I will admit I've always been a Scooby-Doo fan. I've been fond of the original TV series from Hanna-Barbera from the 60s, and I've watched various incarnations of Scooby-Doo with all the different shows that he had over the years. And the ones that I think that really got me the most with Scooby-Doo when they came out and like growing up fondly with, at least around the 90s, was when they started doing the direct-to-video movies like Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, Scooby-Doo in the Alien Invaders, things like that, where basically, because in the original TV series, you had them always, solving mysteries and always seeing a guy in a mask. And when growing up and seeing those other films, it was cool that we were able to see like them tackling like real life type of villains. And I always found that pretty cool that they kind of broke the format. So they've had different incarnations of Scooby-Doo over the years, but those are the ones I pretty much go to when it comes to like if I want something completely different than the traditional series. And
yeah,
and I do remember also the original live action film that came out in 2002 that I saw in the theater. And even this day, looking back on it, I still kind of find that a guilty pleasure. It has gotten hate over the years, but I still actually fondly remember enjoying it, and I didn't think it was that bad. I haven't seen the second one though, so I can't really comment.
I will say that like you, I grew up big time being a lot older than you. I grew up big time on the original classics. Over the years, it'd be my go-to show on Saturday mornings from school and so on and so forth. And I watched it for quite a long time. I stuck with it for, a good minute up until at least the late 90s. And I did see the live action movies. Now, I've seen both of them. First one I remember not being too bad. And a lot of people, gives it a lot of flack because it doesn't hold up. Agree to disagree. I kind of see it. Now, however, I do agree with the second one. The second one was really, really bad. And and I think I love the 90s movies that you mentioned, but the Zombie Island was like my favorite of the two. I did enjoy the movies. I think there was wasn't there like kind of like a revival, like kind of like in early 2000s where they kind of did like, was like more like a newer version of a TV shows like with Scrappy Moore and stuff. Like it was more animated or something from early 2000s.
In 2000, yeah, there was a 2000 show they brought back Scooby-Doo with, which was called What's New Scooby-Doo, where I can't remember much of it, but it was basically a revival TV series to bring the cast of the direct-to-video films to kind of like do that kind of style of the Mystery Gang. But I can't remember much of it because I've only seen like a couple episodes.
Yeah, I know. I only watched a couple episodes too, and I believe also they did whenever they introduced the character Scrappy Doo. I believe they also did his own kind of thing for a little bit. For a
They
little
in
while.
the 80s they did, yeah. In the 70s, and I think it was the late 70s, early 80s. It was around the 80s when they started bringing in Scrappy Doo because he had a lot of his TV series with Scooby Doo and those, and the focus was a lot more on episodes centered on him. And essentially, it got to a point where because he pretty much became like a kind of a fan hated or a fan hated by majority of fans, they decided to kind of, well, no pun intended, scrap Scrappy Doo from some of the later incarnations and start to do other stuff. So it's been a while, but I haven't really watched any other incarnations of recent Scooby Doo because they've had different ones also past with the last decades or so of different ones that they've done, including one that was like an animated.
I
Yeah,
noticed they continued different reboots of the show for quite some time. And there's before we get into the review of this film, there's also in talks with bringing the director from the Gardens of Galaxy coming in as possibly him directing a. Well, they're still in question because there's possibility that it might be part 3, bringing the old cast back. If not, maybe a live action reboot. However, it's going to be probably better to do the live action reboot because that one supposedly is going to take a more PG-13 borderline
horror
R.
type.
Like it's supposed to get like balls of the wall, like creepy. And so we don't know about that yet. All we know is they're building a kind of, they're trying to see what this one does to see if they're going to build a franchise out of this. And this is how we got this movie, Scoob, which, by the way, I didn't even notice it was coming out for quite a while. I was getting kind of like mixed with the whole like it was just recently I found out about it, like maybe a month or two ago, because I kept getting like mixed up with the the possible redo or whatever with the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy is going to remake it or whatever, and then you also got the whole I didn't know anything about the animated show being made. So basically, yeah. So I will say that upon seeing the film, it was okay. I There's some things that kind of bothered me in the show. Let's just leave it at that. And right now, this movie is getting shitted on heavily by a lot of people. Right before I watched the movie, which kind of got me a little worried. But then when I saw the poster, I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, I could see why." Because there were some things I just wasn't feeling with that poster. But yeah, this movie it was okay. There's some parts I liked, and there's parts I don't like. We'll get
Yeah,
into that.
yeah, I agree. Going into the trailers. I was kind of expecting, probably them taking like a more usual Scooby Doo route, but instead kind of mix up with other stuff. Because from the trailers, it seemed like they were going for like this kind of heartwarming type of story and everything, and doing the nostalgic was definitely there from the trailers from classic Scooby Doo. And originally, before going to the movie, this actually was supposed to come out in theaters as originally intended, but as we know, with the coronavirus and everything, they had to release it on video on demand, which is understandable. And so hope everyone's staying safe out there. But essentially, yeah, upon seeing the film, I can honestly say that it was a little disappointing because me being a hardcore Scooby Doo fan, I felt like the movie just really kind of went into a direction that I don't think was the right move, so to speak. There was potential there, but unfortunately, it wasn't executed the way it should have been.
Yeah, the movie pretty much bothered me as it strayed away from. I mean, I get what they were trying to do, trying to do something new, but I felt like they strayed away from the traditions far too, like way too far. So getting in the pros real quick, I will say that the voiceovers were really good. I did notice that I believe they got the original guy to do Scooby back.
They did. They got Frank Welker, who was actually the original voice of Fred in the original TV series, and he's pretty much the only actor that's ever that's reprised his role from the original TV series. And like when getting to my pros, I was glad to hear him back in voicing. It's weird seeing him playing Scooby instead of actual Fred and everything, but it's still great to hear him play uh, the voice of Scooby and everything. And
say
Well,
yes.
actually, I stand corrected. He's actually played Scooby-Doo himself since 2002. So he's actually played Scooby-Doo for a long time as well, voicing the character.
I actually like that they got somebody from the a veteran from the original shows and the movies and all that. I thought he did that was the smartest choice to play Scooby because Scooby's probably got to be the hardest voice to master
Mm-hmm.
out of all the characters, and the next being Shaggy. And
Yeah.
I was glad to see that. And as far as the rest of the guys, they got actors and actresses. I thought they did really fine with their their voiceovers were really good. The animation was really good, as expected. Judging by like the little small snippet trailer I saw, I knew the visuals were going to be good, and they ended up being really good for the
Yeah.
most part. I
Yeah, I
did
agree.
like they did hint a little bit of the traditional stuff, which I'll appreciate, but there's also a con I have later on that. And it's
Yeah.
it's more of they didn't do enough of it. But they did sprinkle some tradition in there, like the beginning, showing them how they, got the origin story. We got them doing their traditional stuff. Oh, it's May or something when they open up the mask and it's somebody else with the whole
Mm-hmm.
monsters and stuff. They did the music, and I believe when they were going through the credits, they actually used the show beat for beat, like wherever they copied the introductory of the people. So,
Yeah.
because I remember whenever I was watching the credits, I was like, "Damn, this looks like whenever you watch the original and how they open up the credits on that."
Yeah,
So they
that's
did. That was good.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, going into that, yeah, I appreciate that they were able to capture the actual original series opening like credits and everything with that, where it was like doing a remaster version of that in like CGI form, and it worked. It was actually pretty good. I loved a lot of the nostalgic feel was there at the beginning of the film with them going through mysteries and stuff and starting as kids. In fact, there was actually a show of Scooby Doo where they actually were kids themselves called a pup named Scooby Doo. So the beginning of it kind of reminds me of a pup named Scooby Doo at the beginning, and the nostalgic was there. And I love the fact that we were getting into the going back to your performances. They had the right cast to play for this that I appreciated because I think that since you couldn't get I mean, granted, I would have preferred if they got maybe Matthew Lillard back, who played in the live action version, to voice Shaggy again, to voice Shaggy, because he's actually voiced Shaggy in other incarnations. It would have been cool to see him voice Shaggy, but I didn't mind Will Forte as Shaggy. I thought he was fine. I thought he was good. But the rest of the cast,
I was worried about Shaggy at the beginning when he was a kid, thinking they weren't going to go with the traditional Shaggy look. I thought they were going to change his character. When they grew up, whenever they start, watching them grow up and stuff, and they go to their adult form, I thought Will Forte did a really good job.
yeah,
He did the part very well. Um,
yeah. I also
I,
got to appreciate.
Another pro I have, I got to say, there was some pretty heartwarming stuff, more than I actually bargained for a movie like this.
Yeah,
There is some sad stuff you think happens towards the end, and I liked how they really tried to build the relationship. They focus a lot with Shaggy and Scooby, which it should be because they are pretty much the heart and soul of the show.
yeah.
So
And I gotta admit, the casting, like going back earlier, I always thought, from getting Zac Efron to play Fred was actually a really perfect choice to play Fred. He actually brought it pretty well. And yes, like you were saying, with the dynamic between Shaggy and Scooby, it was not only heartwarming, but I felt the nostalgia there because it's basically the key to how much these two like really care for each other and from the beginning. And I like that aspect, how the movie plays it out. Now I have a con with it because it really just falls into really the actual story they went with, but the overall like theme of them being bonding together, I think really worked with it.
yeah,
With the
so
movie.
yeah. Other than that, uh,
And then I also
uh,
got to praise the animation as well. The animation I think was also pretty good. I especially loved some of the there was actually some of the funny moments that I enjoyed in some places, and this is mainly just like some of the like references I got from other because from other Hanna-Barbera properties and stuff that they bring up in like some little animation cues that they use from like some of the older shows and stuff. And when I seen those moments, that's when I was really like smiling and laughing, and I was having some genuine good some really genuinely good reactions from.
Now, I will say the humor for me is kind of just middle ground.
Yeah,
There was some clever stuff from the kind of like the original did that was really good, but then there was also some shit they kept where it felt like they were trying to bring a more modern take, where they were making comments of stuff like something you would hear today. I forgot some of the jokes already, but it was
like
like somebody
they do a lot of
actual.
right. They do
Yeah,
pop culture references. Like surprisingly, they do pop culture references of like A Star Is Born, and they also
yeah.
have one of where the villain is asking him like he's like I'm gonna take Hemsworth here or whatever, and then Fred's like Chris or Liam, and I'm like that's a little that kind of dates your film.
Why the comedy is kind of like middle ground for me. So that being said, now here's where I get to the cons. One of the things I will say that bothered me the most was I get that they were wanting to make a something different, but you got to keep your source material. And the source material I mentioned earlier was there at the beginning. However, it's short lived. And it's so short lived to the point you almost forget that they had source material in the film. They stray so far away from a Scooby Doo film movie that it took me out a little bit of the traditional shit I used to grow up on. Watching the villain, not knowing who the villain was until the end when they take off the mask, that's gone. The villain at the beginning of the movie and it plays out the same. It just went for generic on a generic level, and it took me out of the story.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like this is where I get into my cons now because as much as the first 10 minutes was actually pretty good, going into the traditional Scooby Doo stuff. Unfortunately, this is where the story comes in. I'll be honest, like on paper, I can see what you're doing if you're wanting to, do the idea of doing a cinematic universe with Scooby Doo and other Hanna Barbera properties. Because to be fair, and there was actually a show that was out called, I believe, called the Scooby Doo Show and the Dynamite Hour that came out in the 70s or something. That basically had Scooby Doo cartoons and Dino Mutt and Blue Falcon cartoons like side by side. But if I recall, they never crossed over together. And if you're going to build that up, I think that you really should have, took your time to maybe give us like a whole traditional Scooby Doo film, and then maybe add some like build up for like a following movie or something, or even build something around that's a little different to include those characters.
They went wrong on doing that. I get what you're saying. They were doing that kind of like the whole dynamic show going on, but the title doesn't reveal that. They poorly execute that in our trailers. So we're thinking we're getting a Scooby-Doo movie.
That's what I'm saying.
And you go in expecting that, you walk out like, was I walking off watching like Scooby-Doo meets the fucking Minions or Despicable Me or Jetsons? It's like so futuristic. Bunch of spaceships, gadgets. You feel like the villain is like Gru, but a villain version of that and of that show. And it's like, this doesn't feel like Scooby-Doo. I'm used to them going on inside haunted houses, haunted carnivals, pyramids looking for mummies and shit like that. And then I'm like, damn, man, what a waste of opportunity this was. Didn't care for the villain at all.
Mm-hmm.
The story, while the heartwarming parts are good, I see that they're trying to build something where it was more on sacrifice with Scoob and Shaggy, and it builds so much on a friendship. I like that part. I mentioned that earlier, but everything else just felt so generic and standard.
It did because essentially the problem is that because there's the whole idea is that in this version Scooby Doo in this version is not in Coolsville, the actual setting. Instead, it's actually in our time. Basically, it's set in Venice, California, and basically the actual hero that he idolizes, Shaggy idolizes, Blue Falcon. There's a story you could do with that would probably, build up a little better and maybe take it to where they're kind of like referenced or something like throughout the movie. And you're just focusing on just a Scooby-Doo film, and maybe kind of do like maybe a third act or something that kind of brings it in with the characters. Maybe that
Yeah.
could work, but unfortunately, the way they do it, it felt rushed. It was basically taking the equivalent of, this is a weird comparison, but I'm only gonna bring this up because this movie did in its first movie altogether. It's basically what The Mummy of 2017 did, where you're trying to do a regular, how that movie was trying to do a mummy movie, but instead it was doing so much rushing with trying to do a cinematic universe on a wrong way. And when you're doing so much rushing with that, trying and doing so many references to other properties and trying to do all these like tie-ins and stuff, it's just, it takes the focus out of what you're trying to build with.
They also did that Russian part at the beginning too, where you want to build the origin story, how you met Scoob and how you met the gang, and we're introduced to him and Scoob quick, and then they're introduced to the gang like instantly, like in the 5-minute period. We're rushed with the origin story, and
Yeah.
then it's okay. They grow up, catching monsters, whatever you want to call it, and the traditional stuff I like. And then that's when they get into the Space Jam or Space Coast to Coast bullshit. That's what it kind of reminded me of, but kids
Yeah.
version. I'm like, oh, I'm just not feeling the whole story dynamic or anything. But other than that, that's pretty much all I got to say. It was pretty disappointing, but it wasn't bad. I can live without watching it again. So with that being said, I'm gonna give this film a average Joe rating on the Film Freaks meter.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm going with a average Joe on the Film Freaks meter as well. I think that there was potential you could have done with this, but I just feel like they missed the mark with it overall. But I believe though that because seem like there is hope that the movie brings toward the end of it, that they might be going with traditional Scooby Doo stuff in the future. So if they want to build upon it on that way, I could maybe see the potential there. But as its first, outing, it wasn't quite in the right step at first. So yeah.
Yeah.
So for those of you who have also seen Scoob and also the other incarnations of Scooby Doo and Where Are You and all them, let us know in the comments below what you thought about it, and stay safe. And we'll see you in our next review. We'll see you later.
Later.